This webinar is about integrating AI with collaboration solutions. My name is Eden, and I'm on the marketing team at Sunset Learning. And our presenter today is Daniel Ball. Daniel has been working as a collaboration engineer for the last 13 years, and he's been with Sunset Learning for the last 2 years. He's edited 2 of Cisco's official certification books, and he's right now working on his 3rd. So we are very excited to have him here today to teach on this subject. Daniel, thank you for presenting today. We are so excited about your presentation.
All right, here we go. Great. Move this window here. Hello, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. Thank you everyone for joining us today, and welcome to this short webinar/tech talk session on integrating AI with collaboration solutions. Eden's already introduced me, but again, my name's Daniel Ball. I'm a collaboration engineer here at Sunset. I usually do the SRE Tech Talks, if you're familiar with those, but today I'll be walking us through a short little webinar on how we can integrate AI with CUCM. So here's a quick glance at the main points that I want to talk about today. The first thing I want to do is just kind of quickly introduce, what we're trying to do here. What is this webinar all about? And, what are we trying to achieve with this? Next, I want to go into the nuts and bolts, so to speak, about how to build an AI application that allows you to essentially talk to your CUCM using natural language. It's a little bit like the Wild West in the sense that we're kind of in new territory here. When you think about this idea, hey, I want to integrate AI with my CUCM. There's really no specific path to follow here, and in some ways, I keep having this reoccurring sense that we're sort of discovering things like best practices as we go. And so I'm going to go ahead and just sort of list out what I think is the most important design criteria, as well as some actual steps that you need to take to build such an application. And then, of course, we're going to be offering a lab video where I'm going to go through and build out a larger AI CUCM application. And so I want to give you kind of a lab preview of sorts and kind of go into the specifics about what we're going to build and how we're going to build it and so forth. And then finally, at the end, I think we're going to be doing a Q&A chat session where if you want to, you can ask some questions in the chat. And then I guess after that, we'll go ahead and wrap it up. So let's go ahead and get started. As you know, AI, and especially generative AI, has been really a game changer over the last year. And I laugh because, that's probably the understatement of the year. There has been an avalanche of new AI-based applications, as well as new and useful ways to integrate AI with existing solutions. And I can make a long list of examples, but just kind of keeping this, kind of collaboration focused. Let's talk about WebEx. I mean, with WebEx just this year, we've seen how AI can, for example, summarize your meetings for you, or if you have to step away during a meeting, it can notice when you leave and when you return, and then summarize, whatever you missed. A lot of really cool features, really taking advantage of what generative AI has to offer. And, while all that's cool and great and wonderful and everything, personally, because a big part of my heart is on-prem, personally, I've been waiting to hear how, or even if, Cisco plans to integrate any kind of generative AI capabilities into any other areas within collaboration, especially with Cisco's Unified Communication Manager. I mean, the CUCM is, after all, at the heart of Cisco's on-prem collaboration solution. But, we don't have to wait. We can build our own AI integration or AI tools or plugins or whatever. In fact, I know that a lot of the updates for WebEx, the ones that I just mentioned, adding the AI features to WebEx, I understand that they had already existed as add-on tools that other organizations had built in one form or another before they became sort of standard in WebEx. So we don't really have to wait. We can build whatever, we can imagine. And that's kind of what this webinar is about. It's about exploring one way, one of many ways, because there's not just one way to do this, one of many ways that we can integrate generative AI with Cisco Unified Communications Manager. And I think for us, or at least for this webinar, with the specific goal of being able to interact with our CUCM using natural language. So the idea is that we want to be able to ask it questions like, how many users do I have? Or, hey, what device pool is John Smith's phone using? Questions like this. As an alternative to looking up this information manually or digging through various menus or in order to find this information. As an alternative to that, we can just ask it using natural language and of course receive that answer in natural language as well. So let's drill down on that a little bit. How do we build such an application? So what we want to do essentially is build an application that sits between the user and CUCM. And that application is going to do a bunch of seemingly magical stuff. It's going to take the user's input and process it with a large language model or LLM, and essentially turn that natural language request, interpret or translate that into an API call to CUCM. Now, CUCM is then going to return data. It's going to send it back to the app. And then the app is going to process that data using the LLM, kind of in reverse, then process that information and convert it into a natural language response. And then it's going to send that response back to the user. Now that's kind of the basic flow. It's going to be a little bit different depending on whether you're just reading data from the CUCM or if you're actually writing or posting data to CUCM. But in general, that's kind of the basic flow. So then, how can we do this? How can we build this kind of application? So the way that we manage CUCM, at least programmatically, is via the administrative XML or Axle API. So developers can use the Axle API to automate the configuration and management of CUCM. And this allows you to do things like adding or removing users, or adding and removing phones, or gateways, or really any device, updating the device's settings, or retrieving any sort of information or details about your current configuration. Pretty much anything that you can do through the normal web-based interface, you can do via the Axle API. So our first, I guess, design criteria, any kind of plug-in application or extension that you might want to build to integrate AI with CUCM, you're going to have to do it with the Axle API. Now, the problem is that in order to use the Axle API, you'll typically need to understand SOAP and XML. Now, I don't want to get too sidetracked here, too deep in the weeds here, but just briefly, SOAP, or Simple Object Access Protocol, it's an API architecture that, well, it isn't really used much anymore. And this is because, frankly, it's not very easy to use. The data exchange format for SOAP is XML. And XML is, among other things, it's verbose. It's not very easy to read by humans. And this makes even worse because there's a lot of overhead of the SOAP envelope. And so it has become this it's an unnecessarily complex heavyweight option when you compare it to more modern API architectures like RESTful APIs, which use JSON instead of XML. JSON is much easier for humans to read than XML. And so therein lies one of sort of the main issues with making an app like this, is that eventually you're going to have to leverage some kind of generative AI, whether that's something like OpenAI using their LLMs, or even a locally run LLM. These systems are not built on SOAP and XML. They're built on REST and use JSON. So to build an AI app for CUCM, the next sort of, I guess, design criteria is that you need to convert the data that you receive back from your CUCM into JSON. Now, we can't, do anything about SOAP. That's CUCM's API architecture. But we can at least convert our data to JSON format instead of XML, just to make that data more manageable. Now, to be clear, I'm sure there are ways, to use XML. It's not like it's impossible or anything like that, but I'm even more sure that whatever workarounds exist, they're not going to be easy or straightforward to use. Again, one of the main design principles that I sort of follow is simplicity. And so converting your data to JSON is going to be essential, I think, for our processes here. Now, I want to mention that eventually, you're going to need to leverage the capabilities of an LLM. And so the next step would be to determine which LLM you want to use. And that choice is going to have huge ramifications with respect to, how you're going to use that within your app. Is there going to be any coding involved? And if so, do I need to use a specific language? Are there hardware requirements? And of course, cost is a big concern. By the way, I figured that I might as well just go ahead and give you the punchline now rather than wait. For our lab, for the LLM, we're going to be using OpenAI ChatGPT 3.5. You could use one of the other ones. You could use 4, for example, if you wanted to, but 3.5 is cheaper. It works perfectly for our purposes, so we'll be using that, at least for some portion of the lab, probably a significant portion of the lab, but just to add more options, because maybe you don't want to use OpenAI for your application. Maybe you have security concerns or whatever. And so another thing that we're going to be doing in this lab is see how we can use a third-party LLM that is hosted locally. This instead of using OpenAI. So we'll get to see it. We'll get to see how to do it 2 ways: one with OpenAI and one with a locally running LLM. And then finally, the last item on the list is building the agent. Now, at this point, it would probably be useful to differentiate between agent and LLM because they are different, and we're going to need both to build our application. So you can think of large language models, or LLMs, as being generative. They're used to achieve general purpose language generation, or other tasks that require natural language processing. So, but the problem with them is that they lack advanced reasoning. So they're not able to solve, complex problems. And so that's where an agent comes in. For tasks that require more advanced reasoning, you need an agent. So let's turn to that. Let's start talking about the actual lab so that you can see what's involved more specifically in order to build this kind of application. So the first thing that we're going to do is make use of a third-party library. It's called Cisco Axle. This is written in Python. It's going to help us abstract away from all of the complex SOAP-based commands that we typically need to use. And by using this library, all of the XML, all the SOAP envelope, all of those other items that I mentioned, that just the overall difficulty that's associated with SOAP is going to kind of stay under the hood, so to speak. We have to deal with it somehow. We can't just not decide not to use SOAP. But at least this way, it'll for the most part remain under the hood. As you can see, API calls to CUCM are extremely simple. In this example, if you without the library, it's a lot of code. But here, in this example, in this example, by the way, I should point out that all I want to do is return the user's first name and last name. It's just, for example. Obviously, in a real lab environment, we'd want to do much more than that. But here, we're just returning a first and last name. So at least, you have to connect. So once you've connected, it's just 2 lines of code. It's super simple. Again, in our lab, but we're going to be doing much more than just grabbing the user's first and last names. We'll be pulling out, I don't know, user IDs, phone numbers. We'll see how to grab information about the phones, maybe, device pools. Again, whatever you can do through the web-based interface, you can do that programmatically, and we'll be able to see several examples of how to pull down a wide range of information. And by the way, in my opinion, this is the coolest part. We're not just going to be reading data. The application that we're going to build will also be able to post data to CUCM. So for example, you could type into this little chat window, you could type in, create a user named Robert Smith, or whatever. And then your application will be able to go in and create that user. It'll be able to make a post request just from you, typing that in and telling it to add the user. So there's a wide range of things that we can do here. This little snippet that you see here is just barely scratching the surface. Okay, so that's making API calls to CUCM. Now, of course, we're also going to build a Flask server. Now, for those of you who might not know, Flask is a Python package that allows you to build pretty much any kind of web server or API that you might need. It's nothing fancy, but it's fast and it's simple. That's the most important part, at least to me. It's simple, and it'll be perfect for this project. And the reason that we're going to build a web server is that once we're able to make API calls to our CUCM, we can then, one, convert the data that's returned to us into JSON, and then two, serve those results as JSON on one or more endpoints that we can later use to connect to our large language model. So in other words, if you think about it, this web server that we're going to build, it's actually going to be our own. It's kind of like a custom API that's based on Axel API calls to our CUCM. Now, a couple of things here. These endpoints and this web server, just to clarify, this is going to be local for security purposes, yes, but also just for simplicity. We're not creating a publicly accessible API that we have to authenticate to. This is just something that's going to exist on the same local network as your CUCM. And I'll show you here in just a second what that architecture is going to look like. Now, once we have that set up, we're going to build our AI agent. Now, you can do this with any language. But honestly, this topic alone can get really complex really fast. And we could easily turn just this one section of the lab into its own 4 or 5 hour lab, just by itself. So what we're going to do instead to make this a little bit more manageable and approachable is we're going to make use of yet another third-party tool called Flowise. Now, Flowise is basically, how could I describe this? It's like a drag and drop tool that allows you to build AI applications on top of LLMs. Now I said drag and drop, but really I don't want to give you the wrong impression. I would describe it more as it's kind of a low code tool rather than like just a drag and drop tool or no code tool, because really, if you spend any time working with this, you'll soon realize that if you want to build anything besides, the most basic and simple apps, you're going to have to do at least some scripting. Now, for Flowise, this is going to be JavaScript, but honestly, it's pretty minimal. And of course, I'll be walking you through the entire process. You don't need to know JavaScript to complete this lab. And by the way, you don't really need to know Python either. For some of the other tools that we're going to be building. Like I mentioned just a minute ago, that we're going to be building a web server and a full API. I'll be walking you through all of that in the video. Of course, having some background in a programming language, any programming language, would be helpful, but it's really not a prerequisite. So if you're there thinking, well, I'm not really a programmer, I don't really have a lot of experience programming, I'm not sure if this is something that's right for me. That's wrong. This is right for you. You're the perfect. If you're a CUCM administrator and that's all you've really ever done, you can still do this. It's fully approachable to everyone. So let's take a look at what we've got so far. We have a Flask-based server, and it's going to make API calls to our CUCM using a third-party library. That information is then being served to various endpoints so that our FlowWise application can then go out to that local endpoint, then grab that data and process it through a large language model, essentially allowing us to interact with our CUCM using natural language. Again, for our lab, all of this is going to be inside the local network. But you're probably wondering, well, what if I wanted to access this application from outside the network? What then? Well, what we can do is we can make this application available via a WebEx bot so that no matter where you are or what device you're using, as long as you have access to WebEx, to the WebEx app, you could have access to your CUCM via your custom AI application. Now, normally bots in WebEx are, well, honestly, they're a little cumbersome to develop because you typically need a public facing server to develop and then host it. And you have some pretty significant security issues, especially since this will be plugging into your CUCM. I mean, that is a big deal. That is nothing to mess around with. And of course, there are cost issues for hosting the server, especially if you're using some kind of platform, instead of hosting it yourself, if you're using some kind of platform like Heroku or Render or DigitalOcean, that certainly can add up. However, what we're going to do, we're going to use yet another third-party Python package written specifically for hosting Cisco's WebEx bots using, and this is what's different, it's using WebSockets. So the fact that it uses WebSockets, that's the key. It's not going to be hosted on a publicly available server. So you don't need to host it on Heroku or whatever. It can still remain inside your network because all communication with WebEx, with the WebEx cloud is done via WebSockets. Now, WebEx bots can be a bit of a rabbit hole. I could, speak at length on just this. I'm not going to. I'm going to kind of skip over some details. We won't skip over that during the lab. During the lab, I'll go into more detail about how all of this works. But the way we're going to do it, just kind of skip to the end here, just let you know that the way we're going to be building this bot is we're going to have full control. We'll be able to limit exactly who is and who is not allowed to add the bot to their WebEx app. So if you don't have the bot added to your WebEx app, you're never going to be able to interact with it. And so this way we can limit who is able to add it in the first place. So you could, for example, you could limit it if you wanted to. You could limit it to just yourself. Like you're the only person in the entire world who will have access to this bot. Or if you wanted to, you could create, a list, a short list, 3 or 4 or 5 approved users. Or you could make it available. I mean, if you wanted to, you could make it available to anyone who shares a certain domain. Probably wouldn't want to do that, but you could. Or of course, you could make it available to anyone and everyone. Obviously, you wouldn't want to do that. But again, that's an option. Access is fully customizable. And remember, this bot is not open on the internet. It connects only via WebEx, only to WebEx, only via WebSockets. So it's not an open server on the internet. So just a few more details about the upcoming lab. If just wanted to sort of reiterate these points. First, this lab is going to be hands-on, meaning that you're going to be building everything from the ground up. So I'll be creating a video. I'm going to go through everything step by step. Just follow along in the video, and you'll be doing everything from the ground up on your own. Okay. Second point I kind of want to reiterate is that, of course, this lab is going to be delivered via video. So the kind of the nice thing about that is that you'll be able to do it at your own pace. You could do a little bit at a time, walk away. Because, and the third point is I've designed it to be about 4 hours long. So you might actually appreciate being able to get up and walk away and come back to it whenever you can. Now, just kind of a side note, it might take some of you much longer to complete that. If you don't have a lot of experience building something like this, then certainly it could take you much longer to work through all of the steps, depending on your experience level. But on, the other side of that coin, if you are very experienced, then you could perhaps finish it much sooner. So, it just kind of depends on what your experience level is. All right. I think that's about it from me. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. I know we're still going to do a little chat session here, but otherwise, Eden, I think I'm going to go ahead and hand this back to you.
So as Daniel was mentioning, we have some extra training for you guys after today's session. So the details will be sent in an email to you very soon, but just wanted to give you a little bit of a teaser there. So if you guys have any questions for Daniel, go ahead and throw them in the chat or the Q&A, and we'll be happy to answer them. We have, 15, 20 minutes. So if you want to stick around and ask some questions, we will be here for you. But otherwise, thank you so much for coming, and we hope to see you in another webinar of ours very soon.
If you like this video, don't forget to subscribe and click on the notification icon to get notified whenever we upload new content.